Hey all, good to see so many of you today. Enjoyed that conversation. Thanks for the feedback. As we talked about, this is going to cover the beginning of the post-war world, much like the last time. Print out the graphic organizer that I posted, covering these 7 events following World War II, and fill it out, handwrite it, fill it out, put your name on it, take a screenshot of it, scan it, or not take a screenshot, take a picture of it or scan it, and then post it to the assignment there on Google Classroom. We'll make it due Thursday at 11:59 p.m. And you'll also have a second assignment that I'll get up doing some reading and answering some questions that go with that. Um, this is going to cover the immediate time after World War II. And you'll notice it's actually 14.8. In the book, it's actually considered part of chapter 14. But it's important to understand the difference of how the U.S. behaves following World War II. Following World War I, the U.S., the key word over and over was isolationist. They really withdrew from the rest of the world, and they tried not to take an active role in the rest of the world. Following World War II, they take a very active role in world affairs because they wanted to spread freedom and democracy abroad, and they wanted to avoid the communist government of the Soviet Union from having too big of a role. So this actually starts before the war's over. And this is a very, very famous picture of Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin in February 14.5 at Yalta on the Crimean Sea, on the Black Sea, I'm sorry, in Crimea and the Black Sea in the southern part of the Soviet Union. And February 45, Hitler kills himself in April of 45. Germany surrenders later in April of 45. Japan, remember, doesn't surrender until early September 1945. So this is why the war is still going on. And though it's pretty apparent that Germany has lost, the war against Japan is far from over at this point in time. So this meeting is really going to be more about the eventual fall of Germany and how they're going to rebuild Europe following that. Yalta, again, the 3 leaders, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, meet to discuss the post-war world. Some of the agreements: Stalin promises free election in Eastern Europe. Stalin promises that he will help fight Japan, which is going to become ironic because eventually the Americans are going to decide they don't want him helping them because they're afraid that the Japanese will surrender to the Soviet Union. But right now they do want their help because it wasn't inevitable they were going to be able to defeat them, the Japanese. So Stalin says, after we beat Germany, I will come help you. And also interestingly, they agree in principle, but they don't finalize it, but in general, that they're going to find some way to divide up Germany in the post-war world into 4 territories or 4 occupied zones: the U.S., France, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, to divide up the task of rebuilding Germany, so not everyone is involved with it. Why is this important? Much like the last one, we'll put the why important stuff in red. These negotiations reveal the tension in the relationships between the U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, not only during World War II, because we're in February 45, we still are in World War II, but it foreshadows what's to come and what will become known as the Cold War, this war between the Soviet Union and the United States. That's called a Cold War because the U.S. troops and the Soviet troops never actually go to war with each other, but they fight through different countries and through non-military means for the next, really until the early 1990s. And so that's the Yalta why important. Not only in April of 45 does Hitler commit suicide and does Germany fall, but Franklin Roosevelt does pass away in April of 45. And so his vice president, in the middle of all this going on, Harry Truman, becomes president of the United States. And the first get-together following the surrender of Germany is in Potsdam, Germany, in July of 45. And we have Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin there in another very famous picture meeting at Potsdam. The big 3 agree to finalize this division of Germany that we talked about. They're actually will also divide up the capital city of Berlin, which is in the Soviet part of Germany, but they also decide to divide that up. And they also agree that the country of Poland, which was devastated in the war, partly because the Soviet Union and Germany kind of just plowed right over the top of it, um, new borders and free elections for Poland. And the Soviet Union will get to claim money because of all of the deaths they suffered. The Soviets were very bitter how long it took the U.S. and Great Britain to attack Germany. If you remember, Germany attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, and it wasn't until 3 years later that the United States and Great Britain jumped on board to help them. So that was something else the Soviet Union's got. Why is it important? It's important because these promises really are shallow by Stalin. Stalin goes back on almost every promise he makes. At Potsdam, pretty much all the European countries occupied by the Soviet troops at the end of the war eventually do not have free elections, but eventually come under Soviet control. And we're talking about countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, all of these countries that Stalin said he was going to let have free elections. He does not let have happen free elections. Third one on your list is the occupation of Japan. And as we said at the conclusion of the last chapter, it's important to remember that Japan surrenders only to the United States after the dropping of the atomic bomb. Japan surrendered to the U.S., and so the Douglas MacArthur, who was the commander of the U.S. troops in the Pacific during World War II, commands the 7-year occupation of Japan. The occupation of Japan, is important because it allows the U.S. to reshape Japan's economy and government in the way the U.S. wants, and it is still that way today. It is a free market economy, and it has a parliamentary government, much like Great Britain's, but it does have free elections and no one leader, no fascist leader, or anything like that. So it is not communist, which is what the U.S. feared, that if Japan surrendered to the Soviet Union, they would be made communist. But the other thing that comes out of this is, much like we'll see in Germany when we talk about the Nuremberg trials in a second, the U.S. leads the war crimes trial against Japan to hold leaders accountable for their actions. And you do not have to know these numbers that I'm about to show you. You don't have to write them down. But it is amazing to see, number one, the atrocities, how many people the Japanese military is responsible for killing. And the estimates just among Chinese, Filipino, Malaysians, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Indonesians, and Burmese from 1931, when this expansion of Japan started, until the end of the war in 1945, up to 30 million people are killed by the Japanese military. It's not only the people that are killed, but it's how those that are captured are treated. And the troops that were captured by Germany in World War II, 96% of them survived, so only 4% died. Troops that were taken by the Japanese, over a third of them died. Almost 30% of them died in captivity. Okay, so when you look at it, it's almost 8 times the percentage that died under Nazi control. And this shows you that the Japanese did not respect you if you were surrendered. You were seen as a quitter. You were seen as subhuman because the Japanese taught to fight to the death, and therefore they did not value life of a surrendered person, and they treated you accordingly. Again, don't worry about writing these down. I just think it's stunning to see. And when the U.S. does have these trials, again, don't worry about these numbers, but just understand them. 920 Japanese military leaders are killed for their military atrocities in World War II. 475 received life sentences. Almost 3,000 do receive some prison term. 1,000 were acquitted, but when you look at the numbers, over 4,000 are punished in some way, from prison to life in prison to death, for what they did to those countries that Japan occupied during World War II. And it is, again, the why important that you've already written down. It establishes this idea that is, that military leaders are responsible for their actions even during war. And we're going to look at the Nuremberg trials here in a second that have pretty much the identical importance to them, about showing the fact that people are responsible for their own actions even in times of war.